about when I'm in a car, right? I'm in a car, and I don't identify that I'm that car. I'm inside the car.
Yeah.
I happen to be inside a white car.
Right.
I say that I'm driving around in a 1948 Dennis. It's a post-war classic. It's in beige. It has some dings on the. It has some dings and there's not much fringe on the roof, you know. And so I have this routine that but I mean it. I mean, this is not who I think I am, you know. So here we have Brien, Foster Allen. So here is you are a
1991 Brien.
A 1991 Brien. All right, and you are a
1998.
A 1998 Tarek, a pre-century, pre 2K, right at the edge.
Yes.
All right, so here we are. So we're driving around in these, but that's not who we are, and yet we see so much in the world that has to do with the judgment of this and my plumbing and what and the kind of, this so that let's talk about that. Let's talk about some of your experiences with it and some of our experiences and how we're opening ourselves up to different ways of thinking.
Judgment. It's like a survival reflex.
Yeah. You think that's where we're getting a lot of this, the fear and identity, the white supremacy, the work that you think that's where that's coming from, just a survival mode
and conditioning.
Yeah. Well, how do we get past that? How did you you were a Muslim kid growing up in East Texas.
Yeah.
So talk about that experience and talk about how you went through that experience.
Well, it's a good thing to understand these people who hold the beliefs, for instance, that Muslims are violent people, or that they start when you're a child. So just imagine, like, you're one of these people, right? You're born into an all-white family, and your parents, your pastor, the news programs that your parents watch during the day, your teachers, everyone tells you this certain fact, right?
Right.
From a very young age, it is the most rational thing to do, to believe them, right? Because to say that every piece of evidence I've ever been presented, even those pieces of evidence weren't true and that they were fabricated, to deny that in the face of such overwhelming evidence, you'd have to be an irrational person. So you have to understand that these people have been building these cognitive schemas from all of these different influences, and that it just takes better information to fix them.
Right.
So when they see a Muslim kid who's not violent, who's probably too effeminate, right, and too agreeable for them, and it changes that data in their mind, and they can adapt. And I think that's the case when you see, that's why rural areas are so much more racist, because they don't have anyone in their neighborhood, much less a black person.
Right.
And so when you have just better data presented to people like this, they're capable of adapting.
But even though you're talking about data, even though it's data, we're talking about an emotional level. So how does data and emotion, because I look at this, I mean, I look at some of the, I sit there and I go, well, now wait a minute. There is no way. Like for example, I believe in a woman's right to choose. I believe that a woman is to make that decision. And so therefore I approach those people who I meet from a rational level and say, I'll tell you what, I know how we can both get to where you want. Why don't we fund contraception?
Yeah.
Why don't we fund sex education? Why don't we fund? That's going to get you to the lowering significantly the levels of abortion. It's going to really get you there. So I talk to my wife. I try to convince. She goes, that's not what that's not a rash. That doesn't matter how much data you put on there. It's not. It does not going to convince people if we're at that irrational level.
It's for me, it's having a personal relationship with the data. One of my best friends at UT, who's the doctor that I was mentioning, his name is Cyrus, and he is a devout Muslim. And I was wrestling with my own concept of God, Christianity, and things like that before I abandoned that lower resolution model. And my personal relationship with him allowed me to see, like, okay, there's something more going on here. And at a certain point, I kind of realized that him and I were kind of going to bow before the same God. And at that point, that really, like, having such a close relationship with somebody and seeing how amazing they were, regardless of the model they're using to describe reality, I started to realize there's a surface beneath these models.
That's what I love about the concept of diversity, is that we were talking to Yarley, one of the guests that we had on and he's a scientist from Southwestern University, and we were talking about that, and we were talking about the value of diversity. That think of a field that is monoculture. You know, you plant you have one thing you plant in the entire field. What happens after a few years? The soil is depleted, right? I mean, it becomes subject to disease, and I think of dis-ease, right? I mean, it becomes subject to disease. It becomes the plants begin to and the nutrients are taken out of the soil. But what happens if you take that same field and you begin to you put all kinds of different diverse plants and insects? What happens to that soil?
Flourishes.
It replenishes the flourishing, and so I see the culture in the same way.
Absolutely.
Cultural integration is very powerful. It provided me with a lot of data points to break my own conditioning.
And did you grow up in a monoculture? Did you grow up in the petroleum engineering world, as far as I'm concerned, was a very white, monocultural, male-oriented world?
A lot of it, in my hometown. I mean, 20,000 people, very rural, and so it was very monocultural.
Yeah.
So I attribute my own breaking of my conditioning not to myself, but to my genetics and my environment, my brain's ability to process, coupled with the data provided.
Yeah, and we were talking earlier on our part one of our program that we talked about. You were talking about how you could inside of yourself you could see yourself, or we could see ourselves when we're behaving in a way almost as if we're two different personalities within. And I was thinking about that in my own life, about what the difference between people who have actual multiple personality disorder and me. The only difference is that I can actually tell when I actually know one personality from another. And I can tell when I'm in one personality, I know that the others still exist. People who have actual multiple personality disorder, as far as I know, that's walled off. They completely forget there's another one exists. But I have a whole committee in here. I have a whole group. I have every single aspect of the personality exists in here.
Disassociation. There's a gradient where the disassociation is so strong that you forget who you are.
Exactly.
And I think it's one continuum.
Right.
And all of us exist on it. It's just a matter of where you are. And I'm kind of close to the threshold, but I don't have split personalities.
But and you're able to have that just that part of what you were doing. You went through adolescence. You went through adolescence. I went through adolescence. What a thing! I think about testosterone. My God, you don't want to talk about a drug that has really made. You sit there and here's my sweet boy. He's wonderful, and then suddenly, who the hell is this?
Angry ape.
Yeah, exactly. What? I'm just wondering, just the effect of testosterone on our life, and how it grows, and because I found it at age 70, now that testosterone has dropped down a quart low, I'm beginning to see over it.
I'm jealous.
See that there is. So you guys are still in the middle. You're still under the influence, under the major influence of dealing with this. So where are you? All right. Well, let's talk about something else. What do we want to talk about?
They reminded me. I'm interested. You mentioned you've researched like Alan Watts and these other sorts of spiritual teachers, and related to this concept of the self. Many Buddhist ideology says that they use that as an argument, what you just said, where here I'm a totally different person because there's a camera and, you know, I'm talking to you guys, whereas if I'm talking to my best friend or I'm talking to my mom, you know, everyone's different people. And they use that as an argument to say that there's no stable self, that you're just this moment-to-moment consciousness and that the rest is an illusion. I'm curious what you think about that.
I agree a lot. I believe self is a dynamic, open system that's constantly changing and subject to outside influences. Nice. And there's like a membrane around self that's the body. It's the dash.
The meat suit you were talking about.
Yeah, but it's an open membrane, and it's just a state of constant flux between all of us. It's like what the previous lady, the architectural
Patricia Wilson.
Yes, she talked about how you can feel the energy fields, and I think that's almost a reference to the open membrane that self really is. And self exists, but it kind of doesn't at the same time. It just depends on how you look at it. Yeah. It's possible because we're using words, and those are just models. It's possible to say, well, this is simultaneously true and not. That can also be true.
That's good.
The conflict.
I'm curious about that because, you know, when you talk about the second law of thermodynamics and talk about how entropy happens. Right, everywhere. It goes from a higher state of organization to a lower state of organization. That's just the way, that's the second law, right?
Yeah, it's like, it'll like, I guess the first state would be like, okay, you have an empty room with a neatly arranged pile of bricks, and then entropy, like the highest entropy state would be over here where all the bricks are evenly distributed throughout the room.
And so here's the thing is that how did life organize? Because it's it's disentropic. It has to get more. It goes from a less complex into a more complex, rather than from a higher level of complexity to a lower level of complexity.
That's where narrative comes in, and it's like I have a reason to combust gasoline, or I have a reason to invent a nuclear warhead to stop some guy overseas. That's consciousness. Kind of is the entropy is the impetus of our conscious rationales.
So when it happened, when that first organ, because I mean I think of that from the level of that quanta, you know, how that the soup from this great primordial soup, how it just it gathered together to get all the way up to where here we are today. From this vastness into the organizing, into the place where we could get, it just absolutely, it blows me away. I mean, when people think about, or even just discuss about what God might be, because I don't like you, I do not anthropomorphize God. I can't see. If there is such a word, what it means, what it would mean is that there is no place that it is not. Just nothing. There is no place. It is everywhere, and I'm some localized impression or some localized. Help me. I'm a localized node of the entire that has everything in the same way that a raindrop has every element of the ocean.
Yes.
Even though it just happens to be gathered up into a globule, but it still has every single element of the whole ocean.
Patterns within patterns.
Yeah, that's what, because I think that's really what people want from this spiritual feeling, is a sense of connectedness to the going-ons of the events around you. And when you realize, I think, for instance, that the same atoms that make up your body, that make up your brain, are forged in stars and exploded and evolved over, it's the same. So the three most common atoms in the universe are hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen. And those are the three most common elements in your body, right? So you're literally connected in that way to the universe, and so that feeling of being a part of this, it's like you're not just in the universe, but the universe is in you.
Exactly.
And I think that's what you're describing, and that's a common feeling, and it's true. That's amazing. It's not just something we said to make us feel good. It's a true fact of how the atoms are.
Exactly.
And that's beautiful.
And if I can figure out some way that I can be here that does not make you wrong. You You know, I can still have my philosophy without making you wrong, because it isn't an either or gate. It's an and gate. It has to be. Now I know that's how, so I think of it as a let's say that the total enlightenment, okay, is a 1, and complete disassociation from is a 0. So here we have. But even though life is not, we're not just either enlightened or complete. We're somewhere along that path. So here's the 1 in the middle, right? And all around it, in this rays moving out, are each individual, each one of us. You know, we're just in these infinite number of rays that are on, and each one has a different perspective on the 1, because here's Tarek looking at the 1 from here, and here's Dennis looking at the 1, but we're both looking at the 1, and we're both somewhere along this path of 0 to 1 as we're moving toward enlightenment, moving in that thing. Even though we both, I would look at it and go, well, my experience isn't yours, or yours. That I'm trying to look at it in that way as I try to describe it.
I've seen the same structure myself under the influence of psychedelic mushrooms when I was 19 years old at college. I literally saw existence as a point, and then there was a spherical shell around it, exactly in the way you described.
Precisely. What's your sense of it, Tarek?
I think on certain things that are subjective, that's true. And other things, I don't think it can be true. Morality, I think, is one thing where there's just incompatible notions of morality. Some people, white supremacists, have a notion of morality.
Absolutely, exactly.
And so I think in that case, there are just right and wrong answers to how we should treat people and how what's best for well-being in a person. And I think we shouldn't give up on trying to find the right answer. For instance, we say, in the past we were wrong so much, and I think the urge so often is to say, well, there is no right answer because in the past we were wrong, instead of saying, well, we should find the right answer.
Oh, I agree with you, and that's where that's where I feel about the about this sense of about the relative morality, whether or not it's relativism or not, or whether or not there are answers, because I do believe that there are answers and that there are an opportunity, but it is like if I am moving toward a place where there's an expression, there's a word, I don't know, you've heard this from some of your Hindu friends, right? I mean, they'll use the word namaste, right? All right, and the definition of that is that if when there's a place where the entire universe exists, and that when you are in that place in you, and I am in this place in me, there is only one of us. So, all right, that's the definition of now. So there's an inclusive. So whenever I see a philosophy or an ideology that says there are two of us, there's a you and a me, and I'm going to be better on a hierarchical thing. Yes, I think that we can get to that place. I think that's where we've been where I get into that place. Where is that place of whatever? What does peace mean? What does that peace and togetherness, the synergy, the divine to get collective, that opportunity to be able to, and we're able to work through the culture.
And it's harder than I think we anticipated, because when you do studies, right? So because the thing that complicates it is so much of, for instance, racism or sexism is not conscious, right? It's
exactly.
You're not aware of it, even the most well-intentioned
our unconscious
people,
biases.
Right? And so that's a problem that I don't think was super anticipated, and that makes the question of how we should live in peace and something like that more complicated, because it takes a serious self-reflection. But the balance, and you guys might disagree with this, but I think there's a balance between self-reflection and self-hatred that where I think you can get into this trap of reflecting in yourself and thinking of yourself as inherently sinful as a Christian, right? And just wallowing in that sin, like I said about original sin, and I don't think that's helpful.
Let me ask you that. This concept of original sin, honest to God, I don't understand. I don't. I mean, I understand. I mean, I've thought about it. So I mean, I understand where it may come from, but it doesn't resonate with me. It doesn't resonate. I've met too many people that it just does not resonate with me that we are that the concept of original sin. Do you?
To me, I would say it's kind of the brainstem. That's kind of what original sin is it's unchecked survival mechanisms. And entropy, really. It's kind of, to survive is to increase entropy, I would say, cognitively. So to me, that's original sin, and then furthermore, it's the manipulation of people into being shamed for having a brainstem. For having a body. It's essentially what it comes down to. It's like, oh, well, you're trying to survive and you can't fully control your meat suit. Like, how dare thee? You know, you should burn in hell. Is kind of what I think it is, and it's a projection of shame. It's a manipulation of shame.
That shame, the entire idea of the healing of shame, because I've known one of the things that I feel so clear about is that the more transparent that I am, the more I can be exactly the same here as I am when I am by myself. The more I'm healed, the less I'm into my shame basis. The minute I have to put up a facade, I have to try to put up a facade so that so that I'm a certain way, so that you think of. So I'm attempting to manipulate how you think of me. Then I get into the shame because I think there's something wrong with me that I'm covering up, and I think this is where the LGBTQ movement has been so healing for us, because it has allowed people to be more who they are. Instead of having to live a life that is, and because the shame and in the word shame, I feel like is that there's only one, is light. Expose it to light. That's the only way I've ever felt that shame has a healing, is when we can share it. That's where I see therapy has been such a healing place for me, to be able to talk about my issues.
Absolutely.
But there's another type of shame that's not just your own shame, but it's the shame that others impose onto you by their judgment.
But isn't that a controlling, an attempt to control?
Yes.
It's a control mechanism. You know, like.
And that's what you mentioned. The 1950s, growing up in that time, and I've heard that it is a time where people are so outer-directed that even the notion that they might be unhappy is just shut down.
Oh yeah, no, everything's fine. Absolutely, you bet.
Did you feel shamed of being not perfectly happy
Totally.
in that time?
Totally. And I also felt, because I had because I was so, there were very clear models about what we saw as what a man was. By God, a man. You know, I mean, you know, you didn't share your feelings, and you were strong, and you got up there, and you didn't mind sweating, and you got up, and you spit, and you know, you were taciturn. You didn't talk about any of your feelings, you know. And I was the exact opposite of that. I was completely out there. I just really, you know, I mean, and so that feeling of being unable to identify with and to go, wow, I'm not like that. And it's like I take no credit for being heterosexual. No credit. I just wired that way. It just so happened to be. I mean, I know there are people that talk about that. They say, well, you know, sexuality is a choice. Okay, if they believe that, that's fine, but it wasn't for me. I knew from the very first, as little girls, I wanted to be around them. I wanted to spend time. You know, it was just it just happened to be the way I was wired. It's not. It's hard for me to see it, but then perhaps it is for me. Maybe somebody is 50-50, right on the fence, and they go, "What's he?" Okay, well then that's their choice. Then that's someone who is genuinely a choice.
Yeah, it's and it's tough because especially in the 50s, it's like there is a collective worldview that if any data existed outside the worldview, those inside the worldview would try to bend it to fit inside the worldview to justify the purpose of the worldview. And as we've progressed through time, culturally in society, that worldview has been split into half, and it's dividing just like a cell. And now there's a million worldviews, and eventually we'll get to the point where there's a total abolition of worldviews altogether. The truth is kind of the space between worldviews.
And so we're seeing it. We're seeing the piece. So are you seeing in how people to react to Islam are you seeing a difference? Are you seing changes, evolution in how we're doing here in the United States? And I don't know because I haven't been in other countries. I mean, I've been in the UK and some other, but you're.
I mean, of course, people are far more accepting, I think, than they used to be of Islam. I mean, I think in some cases people can be too accepting, if that makes sense, in the sense that there's certain atrocities that are committed within the ideology of Islam in Muslim-majority countries, for instance, for LGBT people, that people sort of tend to stay silent on because they feel like, well, who's to say if that's wrong, or I don't want to impose.
Exactly.
And I think that's an area where you can say that's wrong. You're not being Islamophobic to suggest that, but I mean, it's a balance, obviously.
Well, it is. I mean, they're even and again, I may get it, but I think in Nepal, the Buddhists are killing. Buddhists killing? How does this happen? So it's not a question of it's a question of what we can both rationalize and justify in the name of control.
Yeah, and within each model, there's always going to be those who take it too far.
Yeah.
No matter the model. And
well, isn't that the divine balance then?
It is.
Yeah. And so, I mean, are you seeing that in your music? So where are you exploring? Talk about, because we haven't talked about you as a musician and where you're going, what kind of, because there's a lot of stuff going on with you right now. You're in a really big creative phase, aren't you?
Indeed. Like trajectory or?
Yeah. Talk, just give us some background in this, because we'll put that right across here. We'll put the website in this, so people can check out some of the music and some of the things you're doing.
I'm just trying to get myself out there, and I'm trying to show people that it's okay to break boundaries in music. Genres are just like little models, little worldviews, and I'm trying to stitch a common theme through it all, and the common theme would be guitar for me. Nice. I'm going to start a bit of a thing on my Instagram where I'm putting out a lot of videos of just guitar with anything, from pop to rap to metal to all of it. I don't
Flamenco.
As much as I can. I mean, as much as my body will allow. And my goal is to get my music to a point to where I can put my ideas in a public space and where I can help people. And that's kind of really what musical is a vehicle. But it's also a vehicle for a rigorous challenge, because my ego will always exist no matter what. And so if I put my ego to a challenge instead of like letting the ego idle and project all of my stuff onto others, I'd rather just project like onto an instrument and just kind of hone all of my stuff. I need a challenge to be at my optimal state.
So I have you might have sort of just answered it there, but I've always wondered why people create art. And I understand the urge